College football nerds, we are here talking Georgia at South Carolina. We haven't had a chance to talk about Georgia since that beatdown against Oregon, and my wife is a Carolina grad, and I have to mention every time I do a South Carolina video, and so she'll be happy to see that I've given her team some love as well. Josh is with me. He's getting nerdy with me as usual, and we're going to talk all things South Carolina and Georgia. Maybe touch on a little bit of a review type deal since we don't have a model yet. That's next week, week 4. We don't have a model yet, and there's plenty of on the field action to discuss so far. Josh, the Georgia fans are going to be excited to know that I had Alabama number 2 behind Georgia after week 1. Last year, I did the same thing. I had Georgia number 1 a week before you did, and they won the national championship. You were a week slower this year again, but you came around in our top 10, and there's a video. You can check it out. And I just want to know, in terms of, we saw what Alabama did Saturday, struggled in Texas, and so they're not even number 2 in either of ours. Talk about kind of how you feel about Georgia. Are they solidly number 1? Have they separated themselves from the pack? Talk about why you did move them into your number 1 slot.
Well, you say I saw what Alabama did. I really saw what Alabama didn't do. And what Alabama didn't do is dominate the competition the way that Georgia's done. That's the simple answer to it. We've had a lot of Ohio State fans that have been all over us about the rankings with Georgia and with Alabama, sort of the anti-SEC thing. And they talk about, we beat Notre Dame. Well, the first week, our position was Notre Dame wasn't a top 10 team. They were not in my preseason top 10. And I don't think I was wrong. It was just when I looked at the roster, I didn't understand why they were ranked highly. We did a Michigan preview, and I said I thought Michigan probably should be the team around number 5, and Notre Dame maybe was the top 15 team. And then Georgia comes out, stomps Oregon, beats them. They could have beaten them 90-0, it felt like, if they wanted to. And for some reason, everybody just wants to throw out the Oregon result. Everybody wanted to say that Notre Dame was a great team, I guess just because they played a close game. And Georgia was good enough that they didn't have to. But that dominance has come defensively and offensively. We talked preseason about how, and we did a whole Georgia preview. If you haven't watched it, you should check that out. That Georgia was number 3 in the country in offensive points per possession. They play a slower brand of football. They're more efficiency focused. They're one of the most efficient teams in college football. They were last year. Even Alabama and Ohio State were great offensively, but in efficiency-based metrics, the offense was about rated the same, and it's because their ability to continually be on schedule, and they get 7 yards out of time almost without fail, and they go and they go and they go, and when they need a first down, Bennett is really good at delivering. They don't have a ton of explosiveness for the amount of points that they score. Alabama and Ohio State have been a lot more likely last year to have hit you for a 40-plus yard play. Really wasn't all that close, honestly, against major competition. But what Georgia does is they score, and they score inevitably, and they give you the ball back, and then they don't let you score. And we're seeing the same thing. The defense doesn't seem to have taken a huge step back. And I think offensively, they look to be as good or better from an efficiency perspective. It looks like the same sort of death anaconda we used to talk about with Alabama, and right now Georgia is that anaconda. And it doesn't really matter what you do. You just sort of feel this suffocating sort of inevitability that Georgia's going to win the football game, and the score creeps and creeps and creeps until it's out of reach pretty quickly.
And talking about South Carolina, we were pretty excited about the Rattler move, just because, one, South Carolina has struggled to have any kind of consistency at quarterback for years. And in terms of pure talent, we were super high on him coming out of high school, what we saw at Oklahoma. And, I felt like against Georgia State, the offense was a little bit, uneven. And I know they lost to Arkansas last week. Arkansas is a team that's in everybody's top 10. They creeped into ours after this win. It was on the road, 44-30. But Josh, I feel like they found a little bit. And yeah, Rattler can be inconsistent. 24-39, 376, 9.6 per is what stood out to me. Not the total yards, not the TD or the INT. Josh, 9.6 per is pretty interesting against an Arkansas defense that was pretty stout against Cincinnati. I get that Cincinnati's not the same as they were last year, but still, that was a situation where it's also not like Arkansas was up 44-10 and gave up 30 points. Like, that was a game in the fourth quarter. So talk a little bit about what you feel like South Carolina's found offensively. Do you think that they're rolling into some kind of identity? How do you feel about Rattler in this offense, and maybe a little bit about the running backs?
Yeah, I felt like they discovered some things offensively. About midway through the game, they found out that they had a pretty good receiver in Wells. And then I also felt like, even though he doesn't show up on the stats sheet so much, Brown was able to get over the top on Arkansas a little bit. I also really liked what I saw from Lloyd in particular. I felt like he was brought a little bit more of a dynamic back, even though he fumbled. The biggest thing I saw is that they were kind of boom or bust, and it was due to Rattler. We were excited about the move with Rattler coming in from Oklahoma. He looks like the guy that he was at Oklahoma. He looks like the guy that's inconsistent. And the thing that really struck me is when they were throwing the ball in Arkansas, it was like they'd have a deep dig or something, and he'd set his feet and he'd drill it. I mean, drill it at an NFL level. And the next play, there's one, just sort of an example, but this was a play that happened. He rolled to his left, nobody in front of him, and he makes the smart decision that I'm not going to run it. I got a guy that's over the top on the defense, and so he just tosses it. And the problem is he made no effort to set his feet, and he airmails the thing 5 yards over the receiver's head going 100 miles an hour, and he didn't need to. And that's Rattler. I mean, he can make any throw, he can miss any throw at the same time. That kind of... Yeah, I think the reality is that it kind of puts a hard limit on what South Carolina can do offensively, because that inconsistency comes and goes, and there's a lot of turnovers that happen, a lot of negative plays that happen. But from perspective of playing a team like Georgia, I think having the ability to make those plays is often more of a positive, because really what you have to do against Georgia is you've got to hit big plays that are going to be contested. And to do that, you have to have a big-time quarterback, and you got to have some receivers with some explosive potential. And, it's the Steven Garcia effect, right? Like, you've got a 5-star quarterback that hasn't panned out. Well, if he gets hot, he can make throws on coverage like Georgia gives you. And at least Rattler gives you that opportunity. Now, he's probably going to lose you a game he shouldn't lose because of his lows, but his highs are good enough to get you there. The question is, do you get those highs or do you not? And most of the time, you're going to get a combination. Any combination or any sequence of lows is going to bury South Carolina too much. So that's what Rattler gives you. It's a little bit of hope, a little bit of dynamicism. But somebody gives you a lot of rope, you can hang yourself with it, right? Like it can be a good or a bad thing for sure.
I do think it's going to be a better test for Georgia than was Bo Nix and Oregon. I wonder, I've got some concerns defensively for South Carolina, and watching the tape, you sent me over some pretty interesting clips from the Oregon game where, man, you had all three linebackers bite on a ball fake, and Stetson Bennett had his pick of who he wanted to throw to without anybody within 10 yards. So, there wasn't a whole lot to glean from the Oregon game, and we've gotten a lot of heat from Ohio State fans, you mentioned in the beginning, because they want to be ranked ahead of Georgia because they were ranked ahead of Georgia in the preseason. And this is our big pet peeve, is like, guys, preseason polls mean nothing, and what should put you highly ranked is showing your ability to dominate. And so what Ohio State fans want to do is say, we beat number 5, Georgia beat number 11, therefore we should be higher than Georgia, which just sanitizes the whole thing and distills it down to zero context at all. I think even though Oregon's really bad, beating them by 46 points is noteworthy. And now we have this extra information that Notre Dame shouldn't have been able to be within maybe the top 25, top 50, probably top 50, but saying you beat a number 5 team in Notre Dame is silly. So I'm a little frustrated with that talking point that we keep getting called homers because we don't want to give you credit for beating at home a team that lost at home to Marshall. It's just ridiculous. I think data on the field matters more than preseason polls. Josh, let's have a little bit of dialogue on the Samford game, because I think that maybe South Carolina fans, because I know a lot of other fans are saying that, like, Georgia struggled with Samford. Of all people, Georgia struggled because they look at that final score. Maybe they look at that box score and see Stetson Bennett only had 8.6 yards per attempt. But Kirby Smart comes from the Nick Saban tree, and the good teams that are most talented enough, the coaches that have enough talent at their disposal, do the thing Nick Saban does. And I want you to educate our listeners a little bit, and maybe even Georgia fans that don't know this. Saban uses these games to work on things that he knows his team's bad at. We saw that in the Samford game. If you go back and watch the tape, we saw that. So add a little bit of context in terms of drives and how they scored, and really just some color around how they treat these games versus other games.
Yeah, I mean, it was 30-0 at halftime, right? But even there, I think it doesn't necessarily tell the full story, because Samford didn't manage a 5-play drive till into the third quarter, and Georgia was either scoring a touchdown or kicking a field goal into the third quarter. So they were marching down the field really, really consistently. They just didn't put up a huge number, because what Georgia was really trying to work on, from what I saw, was trying to build even further on this efficiency game. I think they know what they have in Stetson Bennett. They did try some stuff deep, and he hit on some plays. He missed on some others. I think he has some physical limitations as a passer that are just there. They're always going to be there, and they've kind of learned to shy away from certain types of plays. You're not going to see him throwing a lot of seam routes between two safeties. You're not going to see him, trying to throw a guy that's even with a corner inside shoulder. What he's going to do is he's going to read when there's a bust, and he's going to throw over the top. And he's going to throw underneath where, anything really within 15 yards where you can throw flat is the way I'd call it. He's really effective. And the thing that I saw in particular in that Samford game, and the reason the score didn't get more out of hand, is when they got in the red zone, they slowed down. And I think it was a little bit of a negative for Georgia, but one I think they're aware of. Ladd McConkey is their most effective short yardage receiver. We've taken some heat for not being especially fond of Ladd McConkey. I think he does a lot for that offense, but more than anything, I think he's a really important piece for what they're doing. He's kind of the one guy that can really operate in short space at a high level. And what I mean by that is he's the guy that can get open in a 5-yard route. The classic Amendola examples, right, from the NFL. Somebody that can get you separation quickly. He's a fast guy down the field, but he's not tall enough or big enough to do certain types of passing routes. And the thing is, everybody else on the roster kind of is. Even A.D. Mitchell, who's a burner, is a downfield burner. Kearis Jackson is kind of built like a running back, but again, more of a downfield, powerful slot guy. What they don't have is a lot of short yardage quickness. And when they get in the red zone, it kind of creates a problem, because I think it's a little hard for Georgia to finesse underneath with a passing game. A lot of teams will sort of, some sort of tunnel screen or quick slant or something and hit that and try to get 3 or 4 yards that way. And Georgia struggles with that outside McConkey, frankly. And so they'll either try to bubble or hit McConkey a lot of times behind the line of scrimmage or a back behind the line of scrimmage and hope they can run through with blocking, or they've got to throw over. And this game, they really focused on the height aspect. They threw a lot to Washington. They threw a lot to Rosemary-Jackson, trying to just leverage the fact that they've got big, tall receivers. Because if they can leverage that size, it's going to really help them in the red zone. But by acknowledging the fact that something that they would be good if they were better at, they did more of it. It's the thing that they're not as good at right now, so they probably didn't score as much in the red zone as they normally would. So I would say it's a weakness, but a weakness that they can avoid by doing other things. But they were trying to build up another tool in their toolbox. They're a little more dynamic in the red zone, and it did impair their scoring. But again, it was 30-0 in the half. It's not like they had any real issues. And I think this is maybe a good point, right? Because I sent you that clip in the Oregon game. Can we talk a little bit about perspective for Samford and what you can and can't take away from that game and the Oregon game?
If there's anything you can take away from it.
Yeah, the thing you can take away, I think, is that when they had plays to execute, Georgia did it on a consistent basis. The thing you can't take away, I think, really is what do they do when everybody's mostly covered? Bennett made some really heady plays in that Oregon game and made some tough throws in coverage a couple times. But frankly, for the most part, they were just having guys open, flip it to them, and then they just ran Oregon over. But they really didn't have a lot of guys that were closely covered for most of the game. The most impressive thing was the timing with hitch routes and things like that. Bennett is getting the ball out so well on time that guys turn around, the ball's there. That's great. But there were a lot of big plays from Georgia where, frankly, there were 3 guys with no one within 10 yards. And that's just not something a good defense should ever have happen against any level of competition. Oregon is a bad team. And Samford was very overmatched, but I actually thought defensively Samford did a much better job than Oregon did, which says a lot about Oregon, I think, going forward for the rest of the year. So that's kind of where I'm at with Georgia. I think they're very good. I think they're as efficient as they were last year, a little bit better. But I also still think we don't know a ton. That does turn me over to segue and how much is South Carolina gonna really up the ante there defensively? Because I'll be honest, I'm not sure. Starting off on a negative foot to some degree, but I'm not sure how much that answer is a good one for South Carolina.
So Saturday, what I thought was pretty interesting was that South Carolina, they didn't get just eviscerated by KJ Jefferson. He had, 7-something yards per attempt. He didn't have a ton of yards. He wasn't super effective as a runner. They did get kind of steamrolled by Raheem Sanders, but I'm thinking, Josh, and you can get into this a little bit. A lot of times we talk about, especially in games like this where there's a huge spread and the team's overmatched, we talk about like how is a team going to approach this game. And there's two ways they can approach it. They can either be super conservative and play not to lose, shorten the game a whole lot, hope to get the game in the fourth quarter, down by 7 or 10 or whatever, or they can just open the kitchen sink and throw it at them. And I think that's what South Carolina is going to have to do, because even playing conservatively, they're going to give up a lot of points. They don't have the depth, and Georgia doesn't lack for good running backs, and that efficiency monster is going to put some points up regardless. And they're not going to be working on stuff like they did at Samford. They're going to go for the neck. So I think, Josh, what South Carolina is going to want to try to do is they're going to say, look, if we lose, we lose. If we lose by 3, 4, 5 touchdowns, whatever. But we're going to go down swinging, and they're going to hope they get that Garcia moment from Rattler that he's capable of, and probably throw the kitchen sink at him. Do you see that as a possibility, or maybe even a probability?
I think they're going to have to, and that's kind of what I was saying in the opener, right? Like they're going to have to lean on Rattler's ability to throw the ball, and in particular, it's like you said, they got run over, and that's the scary thing. So now I'm going to kind of try to wrap it all around a little bit. Rocket Sanders was constantly breaking free on them, but the biggest thing to me was South Carolina's inability to consistently tackle. I mean, if you look at Jefferson's yardage, 67 yards rushing on 19 carries, you factor in sacks and everything else, I still felt like he was pretty effective. And he didn't. Now, it's all relative because Jefferson's a guy that can really run over you or have a huge impact on the game rushing. I don't think he was quite there, but my problem was they missed a lot of tackles. They just seemed to struggle the entire game with Arkansas's physicality. And if you're struggling with Arkansas physically, who is a physical football team, Georgia is more physical. And what Georgia brings to the table, we were talking about the flaws and kind of keying this up, right? They got a lot of big tight ends. They've got a lot of big players in the perimeter. They're a big football team on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to have a hard time, I think, stopping Georgia from just constantly sort of progressing down the field. It was the weakness in the game. I thought their downfield pass coverage was pretty good. You can tell they've got some good DBs and some bad DBs, and they had guys get banged up, come back in. A lot of stuff sort of mixed up there. They can get exploited, but I felt like they did okay. But defensively, against size and power, it's a mismatch. And when you're in that position and you've got mismatches, you're going to give up points, you have to play 2 points. And the one thing I will say that's sort of a saving grace in these games, and the reason you have those, I called it a Steven Garcia moment, right, is when you've got quarterbacks that are extremely talented and maybe sort of kind of head cases, but they've got nothing to lose. Sometimes those guys play to a different level. Sometimes that turns out like Bo Nix, where you see the guy throw 2 or 3 horrific interceptions. And really, the Oregon game is kind of funny rewatching it, that Oregon had a chance to kind of stay in it. And then he had the really nasty interception to the safety that let Georgia kind of put it away and go up with 3 or 4 scores. That possibility is very much on the board here with South Carolina. But if it goes the other way and Sanders or Rattler ends up sort of splitting a safety or something for a touchdown and it makes it 14-7, then maybe you can stay in it a little more. So I think that's the question. I think I really honestly want to start getting into the real prediction. I mean, honestly, I just think it's going to be extremely difficult for South Carolina to keep pace. I think it's more a question of how long South Carolina can stay in it. And looking at the spread without even, again, I try to figure out what I want to get one I want to guess for the score and then look at the spread. 24.5 point spread is indicative of that. This is a game that's going to be a real struggle for South Carolina to be really even competitive by the final score. And I think it's more a question of when, but not if they get blown out personally.
Okay, so what do you think that score of them being blown out is going to be?
I'm going to say 52-23. And that sounds like a massive number, but again, it's a 25-point spread. And I'm saying 29. So I'm saying Georgia covers 52-23 is covering by less than a touchdown. So that's kind of the reality you're in. I think South Carolina, if they get down a ton, is going to keep working on things. And this is one where I think you could see a backdoor cover more than Georgia barely being able to cover. I think they're going to have a 24-point lead personally by midway through the third quarter. I think the question is whether or not they're going to be able to hang on to that lead when they do eventually sub in backups. And I think South Carolina, from where they're at developmentally, is going to try to keep pushing because they need to get their offense into better rhythm for down the road. But big time game. I saw South Carolina beat Georgia a few years ago with a far inferior team. Anything can happen, but right now, this is just a major mismatch. And I don't think it's a reflection of the coach. They just got way too much to build on talent-wise, I think, for them to be able to handle with this Georgia squad with the particular matchups that are at play here.
Yeah, I struggled with this one because I think that one of the things that is a little bit undersold from Georgia last year is they didn't play much on the road. They had really, in terms of teams that were potential, challenges, they only had at Auburn, who wasn't good last year, although that was with Bo Nix, and then at Tennessee. And that at Tennessee was a little, until the fourth quarter, it was a little, not so smooth, especially offensively for Georgia. I think some of that might come into play here. I think we've seen that with Alabama, although Georgia's never had the issues that Alabama has on the road where they just completely go on tilt. But I don't think it's going to be the Georgia perfection, super dominant that we've seen in the past. Give me 41-20. I do think that South Carolina is going to find some points. That crowd's going to be crazy. It's a great place to catch a game if y'all have never been. I think it's going to be jumping for at least two quarters, but Georgia's going to figure it out in the end. 41-20 for me. Josh, give me one final point on this game. We're running a little long, but just what you think that if you're a South Carolina fan, what's going to make you feel good about this game even if you don't win?
I think the thing that would make you feel good about this game, even if you don't win, is if you just see Rattler take a little more of a step forward in consistency from his mechanics. Rattler, to me, always looks out of control. There are several times where he's bailing on a clean pocket. He did again. Same thing we saw his first year at Oklahoma. We kind of flagged it, but he ended up being really successful and looked like he might still be successful his next year at Oklahoma, and then it all kind of fell apart. But a concern we had from him from day one, he's always pressing. He's always looking. He's never quite sure of what the situation he's in is like or whether he's comfortable. And he needs to settle down and he needs to just play football and he needs to trust his offensive line and be willing to take a hit and make a throw rather than, trying to bail in the pocket every time and always relying on his legs and athleticism. Use his mind more than his natural talents. The more of a step forward he takes in that regard, the higher the ceiling for South Carolina is. Because no matter the fact, again, that he can make every throw on the field, as long as he's not setting his feet and he's not throwing on proper rhythm, that doesn't matter at this level. And the Georgia game is going to be a huge test of that and could be big developmentally because he's going to be pressured. He's not going to have an easy time of things. And he needs to be willing to take the easy throw, make checkoffs, make the easy completions. Even if it doesn't get you a lot of first downs, that developmentally will have much bigger dividends long term than if he's just letting it rip and throwing downfield, in desperation mode, because that's going to be the kind of guy that's going to throw interceptions against every level of competition, and that's not really where you want to be in South Carolina.
All right, y'all, that's it for us on South Carolina and Georgia. Let us know in the comments what you think the score is going to be, and obviously We do a live show every Saturday night, so be checking that one out this weekend, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern and 9 Central, because, we like to talk ball. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.